Hi folks, this is Jenny, also known as New Uke New York on some parts of the internet, and I'm back with my monthly, hopefully, my monthly series of one-take tutorials. This is the August 2024 tutorial. These one-take tutorials are a chance for me to sit down and live stream a lesson, either on a song, maybe that I've arranged, or on a technique or some other topic having to do with ukulele. Often I am responding to requests either from people on Instagram, on my YouTube channel, or through my Patreon. And I just have to give a quick shout out to Patreon because although this video is free and open to the public on YouTube, my Patreon patrons support me every month with a small donation as their budget allows, and that helps me to make more content like this. If you'd like to join us over on Patreon, I always try to have some extra goodies for Patreon patrons every month, and you can join for 1 month or more. But even if you never do, I'm glad you're here, and thanks for watching this video. I've got a whole series of these. This is getting close to my 30th. It's not quite my 30th one yet, but I'm getting a good long playlist of these. You can check out more of them using the link in the description box, and there's lots of free content on my YouTube channel. So this one-take tutorial was a request. I think it was from a patron who asked for some tips on memorizing songs. And this is a request I've gotten before, but I've never really sat down and thought about it and made myself a list and really given the proper amount of time to a topic like this. So while this probably will be a little shorter than some of my song tutorials in this series, I do want to talk about 10 or more tips for memorizing songs, because most of the people who talk to me about their ukulele playing or who do come to me for lessons or arrangements are people who are doing both singing and strumming. So that's the angle we're going to approach this from. But even if you don't play ukulele at all, even if you don't sing and you only play instrumental songs, even if you're only a singer and you're not having to also play along with yourself, I think you can use most of these tips no matter what you're memorizing, what you're trying to memorize. I do come at this from a couple of different angles myself. I not only play ukulele and teach ukulele, but I also am a songwriter who is sometimes having to memorize things that I have written, which is actually harder than things I've heard 100 times, more than that in a few minutes. But also I have an acting background, so I have memorized lines for plays that I have been in over the years and have used some of these techniques for that as well. So widely applicable memorization tips. I've got a handout in my Patreon post that is free, and you don't have to be a patron to look at it, so click over to that link if you want the handout, but I'll also go over it on the screen here. You can take a screenshot if you'd rather do that, and we'll just go through my memorization tips and we'll see what we have, and then you leave me in the comments things that I didn't mention, how you like to memorize songs, or if any of these tips stand out to you as something you think might really work, or come back later and let me know what did work. I'm interested in hearing from you on this topic as well. So let's start out by me sharing a screen with you of my 10 tips, and we're going to kind of go through them. Again, this isn't going to be a super long video. I will put timestamps in the description box so you can jump around, but I just want to share these tips and give you a few additional things that are not on the handout for each of them that we can talk about as we go. So let's share on the screen. Let's see here. This is the handout you will find if you click over to Patreon. And if we see any typos, I can always fix those later. But for now, here is the handout. 10 or more, there's actually more than 10, but I've written 10 here, tips for memorizing songs on ukulele or whatever you're doing. So let's talk about each of these tips. Let's see here. So first of all, I just want to start out by saying there don't have to be, good or bad reasons for memorization. For some people, memorizing is one of their goals or their biggest goal right now, or they're, way down further on the list of goals they'd like to accomplish. For other people, it's not necessary at all, and they don't even care about memorizing. That's all fine. Memorization doesn't need to be your goal. Maybe you're just watching this video to see what I'll say about it, but you're not actually into the idea of memorizing. That's okay. I don't actually have a lot of reasons I need to memorize, although the more performing I do, the more I like to memorize at least parts of songs, if not whole songs, because it can be a nice way to make sure you're connecting with an audience. It's also fun to be able to pick up an ukulele and just play at any time. But in general, if you aren't interested in memorizing, that's totally fine. So there are lots of reasons to memorize. I just went over a couple of them. Some people are trying to get some pocket songs. Let's see, I'm going to take this off this share just for a second because these things are not on the handout. But one of the things we talk about when I help run on the 100 Days of Ukulele Challenge for Cynthia Lynn is that some people, as one of their goals over the course of those 100 days that they're playing every day, are trying to memorize a handful of pocket songs. Maybe they want 3, maybe they want 5, maybe they want a dozen songs that they could sit down and play for friends and family around a campfire or at a picnic in a park. Maybe they don't have anything but their ukulele with them. They don't have access to the internet, they don't have a songbook, and they just want to play. Or they want to learn some of the most common chord progressions, because there are chord progressions that are used over and over again in popular music. And you can change keys, and you can play with jam groups, and there can be lots of reasons. There are also people who are not reading music, who maybe are visually impaired or have another reason why they would prefer not to use a device or paper in front of them. So there's lots of reasons that you might be memorizing, and so I hope that this video will give you some ideas no matter how you're coming to it and what you need to memorize for. Also, when it comes to memorization, sometimes we have a deadline, we have a pressing need, or we have a very specific song we need to memorize, and sometimes we have more leeway. So this will all be shifted and changed depending on your goals, on the urgency of your need, and on how many choices you have that you can make. If you're playing with a big group and you need to have your part memorized, just like if you were in a choir and you needed to memorize a vocal piece for your choir performance, you would probably have to do the song you have to do, as opposed to having a lot of choice and being able to kind of take your time with it, or be able to choose a different song that's easier for you. So I'm going to give you more general tips, and then you'll need to adjust them. Use the ones that work for you, stick the others in your back pocket for later if they work for you. Throw them out if you just know you're not the type of person to ever do this. We also all learn different ways. So some of us are going to learn more visually, some of us are going to learn more orally, meaning listening, and some people are going to need more repetition than others. So all of these tips are going to need to be adjusted to your own personal style. So let's go back to the tips now. So that was my intro there to the idea of memorization and how you can approach thinking about it even before you have a song, or maybe you already know you have a song you either really want to learn or you must learn for, say, a performance that you're doing. So the first thing I wanted to say is, if you're able to, give yourself a break. So start with a simple song. Start with a song you know really well. Start with a song you can play all the chords. Whenever possible, give yourself the best chance of being able to memorize, especially if you're new to memorization. If you've never memorized a song before, pick something that you, for example, know how the lyrics go. Maybe you even already have the lyrics more or less memorized, or maybe you know the chorus really well and you sing it in the shower all the time. I like to use the phrase sing in the shower songs because I think it can be really helpful to think about what are those songs that you could just, sing to a child as a lullaby at bedtime, or you find yourself humming idly throughout the day or whistling the tune of. If you know the melody, if you know the words, even if you don't know all of them or perfectly, it's going to be easier for you to memorize, because your brain is going to be doing so many different things when you're playing in terms of lyrics and melody and chords and strumming or picking, and maybe there's a riff thrown in, or maybe you're singing along, which a lot of us, a lot of people that I work with are doing. That's a lot of things for your brain to do at once. So as much as you can break it down and compartmentalize, I really recommend it. So when possible, especially if you're just starting out, keep it simple and memorize something that you know really well. And if you get sick of it and you have the luxury of being able to do something else, put it aside for a while. If it's getting really frustrating, put it aside for a while. Your brain can work on different songs and have all those skills come together when you come back to that song later. It will be usually a little bit simpler, and especially if you find that you've chosen a song. One of the first songs I really wanted to memorize for myself was Cynthia Lynn's arrangement of Blackbird, which has picking in it and is really lovely, and it's a multi-page arrangement, and it was a little bit above my skill level when I first sat down to work on it. And even though I knew the song well, it was a Beatles song, I knew all the sections for it and I could sing the lyrics, it was still a little bit too hard for me, and I had to sometimes put it down and come back to it a few months later. And it did get easier to play, even though I was working on other things in the meantime. When possible, I'm going to adjust my light here a little bit. When possible, you can always work on similar skills. Like if a song you're working on has too much picking, go and work on something with a little bit less picking, or maybe strum it for a while and then go back to the picking later. Make it as simple for yourself as you can. And in the same vein, here's tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to divide and conquer. So when I talk about how you've got all these different pieces of a performance or a playing, even if you're not considering it a performance, it's great to break those things down. So when I was memorizing lines for a play, I had some techniques that I would use, and one of them was to write it out. Write out those lyrics or write out the chord progression. You can start out by doing it while looking at it and then just copying it down, because even that physical act of copying what you're looking at, it involves no memorization, but it starts to sink that information into your brain a little bit. So that's one thing. You can use a cheat sheet, either cutting it up into sections and just looking at the verse or the chorus, whatever part you don't know as well, or maybe you just have a cheat sheet for the bridge because you always forget how the bridge goes, or maybe you have a cheat sheet that just lists the chords as they change, and maybe the verse versus the chorus because they're different, or maybe you have just the key words written out on a cheat sheet, so when the chords change you have the first couple of words, or when the second or third verse comes in and you always forget how that starts, you have a cheat sheet that just says that on it. And you can decide if you actually are going to be performing this song, do you want to use that in a performance? Maybe, maybe not, but you can certainly use it as a memory aid when you're practicing. I also think it's really helpful to sing along or play along before you do both. So whether you yourself make a recording of something, audio or video, you can use the Notes app on your phone, you can use, a simple video camera on your phone, make a recording of yourself playing it while looking at the music that you can later drop the music and sing or play along to. Or whether you use a play along online, one of mine, one of Cynthia Lynn's, another ukulele teacher who's doing it in the key you want to do it in, or you listen to the original, you listen to your favorite cover of this song. All of these things can be really helpful because you can, again, compartmentalize, and you can do it just playing while letting that other person or the recording of yourself sing along. Or you can just sing while letting that other person play along. I think a lot of people have told me that they use Cynthia Lynn play-alongs this way, and they like to let her do the singing while they work on the chords. And once you've got the chords going, and you can even do it without the music in front of you, then you can work on the singing, and you can even drop the playing for a while if that's going really well and come back to it later. So think of ways that you can kind of break things up, that you can do this in chunks. And that can really help you not feel like you're overwhelmed when you're trying to focus on everything at once. Don't get too attached to your cheat sheet if you are having the goal of not needing one at all. So you do want to be able to put that away, even if you're going to make mistakes. Do some practice without that cheat sheet. Or really forcing yourself not to look at it so that you will eventually not need it at all. Because we do sometimes get too reliant on it. If we tell ourselves, oh, at this, and I do this is me talking, oh, at this open mic, they don't care if I have it memorized, so I'll just have the music with me. And then you actually know the song and you don't need it, but you become so reliant on looking down on it that you can't look up and out at your audience. So I have to be a little careful about that, and if you do too, then sometimes it's better not to use the cheat sheet at all, or to be very judicious about how quickly you put it aside. Again, even if you're going to make mistakes, you don't want to make the same mistakes over and over, because that can drill things into your brain as well. But it is okay to make mistakes and then correct yourself. Often I like to stop and go back and start that section again so I can go through it without making that same mistake. So do practice correcting the mistakes, but don't be so afraid of a mistake that you won't look up from your page if you do have a cheat sheet. All right, so let's look back here at a couple more things on that point number 2 that I wanted to mention. Another thing that you can do is to work in sections, which is something I was just talking about. So identify what the verses are, what the chorus is, if there's a bridge, if there's an intro and outro. Don't always start at the beginning and work to the end, even though that's how you play a song, because you'll find the beginning will go a lot better because you've played it a lot more and you haven't always gone to the end. So sometimes do the outro. Just practice for 5 minutes on the last verse of the song or the bridge, and make sure you get to those later segments of the song. Or you can spend a practice session just working on one of the segments and not even doing it from the very beginning, especially if the beginning is easy for you or going well. Or if it's more complicated, you can save the harder parts for later. Again, that's like giving yourself a break. Like tip number 1, you can start out with something that's a little bit easier and then come back to the section that's a little bit harder for you. Along with the idea of working in sections is an idea I read about online called drop the needle, which is the idea of playing the whole song but starting from different points in the song. So maybe you tell yourself, all right, we're going to pick it up at verse 2, and you play from verse 2 through the end, or whatever variation of that you want to do. Practice stopping and starting at different places. You would sometimes need to do this if you were rehearsing with a band or a chorus as well, to go over a certain section. But even if you're just playing or singing by yourself, it can be good to test your memory that way, to say, what if I wasn't starting on the first verse of the song? Would I still remember how the second verse goes? So challenge yourself that way. And as I said at the beginning of the class, it's a really good idea too, if you can, for your first few songs, pick something that you know well enough you could sing it in the shower. And don't consider the lyrics memorized until you can. If it wasn't one of those songs that you know that well, then that's a good way to practice. Sing it in the shower, sing it in your car, sing it when your hands are busy, sometime that you don't have the luxury of being able to look down at music. That's going to be a really great time for you to think, do I really know the lyrics for that? I just got out of the doctor's office and I'm walking through the parking lot. I can sing the chorus of the song and see if I remember how it goes. Give your brain those little challenges. It's going to help you to be more ready in a performance situation if you're going to do it, or when you're just sitting down to play on your own. I also think it can be good to practice in different positions too, because sometimes we practice the whole song sitting down every time, and then we decide we want to play it in an open mic, and standing up is different enough in our body that it then makes us blank. So definitely practice it. Imagine if you are practicing for a performance, imagine there are people watching you. Maybe they're talking. You could even turn on your TV and have it play low in the background if you're working on a performance piece. Like you're going to play it in an open mic and people might be chatting, or you're going to play at your cafe or your local farmer's market or something like that. Put on a distracting sound for yourself, not too loud, but just to give yourself a little bit of background noise, and then try to play and sing the song. It can be a really good way of practicing for those kinds of situations, which are different, sort of take a different kind of mental attention and energy than if you're just playing it by yourself in your living room. All right. I'm just checking my notes to see if I got everything I wanted to talk about in point 2. Yeah, so let's look at point 3. Tip number 3 is to use repetition. So this is key, and I think for a lot of people, when you talk about memorization, this is the most important one. So these are obviously not in order of importance. This was true for me when I was learning lines for plays too. The more you do the repetition, the more it's going to sink in. And that can be doing it just like you would like to perform it, but it also can be what we call speed throughs, where you kind of do it quickly just to test your memory to see if you remember the melody and the tune, or if you remember those chord changes. You can play it double time. You can also play it slower. You can make it something that you just incorporate listening to it, maybe the recording of it that you made, or your cover or your original piece that you're trying to make it sound similar to. You can listen to that when you're in the shower, when you're washing dishes or brushing your teeth, on your commute. Try to inject it into your day whenever you can. Not so much that you get sick of it, but then sing along. Pick up where you know. You don't have to know the whole song from start to end in order to sing along with the parts that you do know. And it's a great way too to learn, oh, I actually got that lyric wrong, or the chord sheet I've been reading this from actually got that lyric wrong, and then fix it for yourself. So I like to listen to it a lot during the course of a day, during the course of a week. Again, not so much that you get tired of it, but so that you're making it part of your atmosphere, and also make it a part of your daily practice. So even if you're only practicing it for 5 minutes at a time, if you have a piece you really want to memorize and you really are working on it, especially if you have a deadline, try to spend 5 minutes on it. Even if it is just, I'll see how far I can get through it this time, and then I'll move on to other things that I also want to play. It doesn't have to be super serious for you, but it's going to help the more you do it. Let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, it also can be nice to speak the lyrics, to hum the melody while playing, as I said, to say the chord changes out loud while you're listening to it. You could listen, say, to Cynthia Lynn play it and say F, G, A, C, or whatever those chord changes are. So you could do that. You could sort of just do the shapes either on your ukulele or in the air, think about, okay, that's where I'm moving from this to this. So those sorts of things can also help you work in a little bit more repetition, even if you're not able to have ukulele or to have practice time. And you can even sing it with a metronome, so you can do it without any music at all and just focus on the rhythm and how the lyrics move. This can be especially helpful if there are tricky lyrics, but even if they're not, sometimes turning on that solid beat and just trying to stay with it with those lyrics that you're doing, even if it's slower than the song will go when you have it up to speed, can be a really great idea too. So let's move on to tip number 4, which is to mark it up. I do like to spend a little bit of time, and not everyone learns this way, but I like to spend a little time with it down on paper so that I can look at how the chords change, look at how the lyrics move, and to really, these next few tips are going to come pretty close together to do things like underline or circle where the chords change with the lyric that they change on, especially on some people's chord sheets where it might not be lined up very well, especially if they've written the chords above or they're just at the beginning of the line, but they don't really show you where the chords change. You may need to make some adjustments, you may need to fix some things, but sometimes it's helpful just to underline, like if it's Stand By Me, which Cynthia Lynn has a video on how to sing and play at the same time, she notes that you're doing something like stand by me, 3, 4, stand by me. And so those notes that come in on the 1 of a 4-beat or a 3-beat song, if you're also changing chord at the same time, to underline that or circle that all together and say, here is, you can just focus on those words, the stands when you come in on beat 1. Something like that can be really helpful, and I often do that with my students when we're learning to play a song, but it can also really help for memorization as well. And then related to that, as you're either marking it up, as you're looking at the song more in detail, look and listen for patterns. So you may notice that the chords are the same all the way through. There are a lot of songs that use that sort of like really classic chord progression. Like for example, it might be C, G, A minor, F, and maybe it's the whole song is that all the way through. Or maybe every verse is, but the choruses are a little bit different. So think about where your patterns are. Where do you have several lines in a row with the exact same chord progression? Or depending on how it looks on the page, it may be a little harder to spot. Sometimes it'll be over the course of 2 lines that you have the same 4 chords and then they repeat again. Or maybe there is just you could start with a 2-chord song. Sometimes that's a nice way to start with memorization. In my songbook, we have Cynthia Lynn's arrangement of Dreams by Fleetwood Mac because it's a public arrangement of hers, and it's just F and G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The whole song is that. So once you have this rhythm down and whatever strumming pattern you're going to use, you just go back and forth between those 2 chords for every verse and chorus. It never changes. And so something like that can be a really nice way to memorize when you're first starting out. Look for those 2-chord songs. Look for the songs with the really repetitive patterns. Like another one that we have in my songbook is my arrangement of Book of Love. It's a picking pattern, but it's very repetitive. It just said the G to the G sus, D, G. The whole song is like that. So again, you could do the entire song, and all you'd have to remember is in the transitions, how many times do you do that exchange? So that's another one that I memorized pretty early on because I found that repetition, that repetitive pattern. And once you can put that into muscle memory and your brain, then that can be a really important thing to notice. And also related to all of this, number 6 is leaning into rhyme and rhythm. So again, if you feel a pulse, if you feel big words coming on important beats, if you feel like the rhyme, there can be internal rhyme inside a line, there can be end line rhyme where maybe all the words at the ends of the line of the chorus or the verse have the same rhyme or similar sounds, or maybe it's every other line or the first 2 lines rhyme and the second 2. The more you can notice these sorts of things and internalize them or circle them on your page and then think about them while you're playing, the easier it's going to do to remember things like what's the next lyric. Oh yeah, it has to rhyme with rain at the end of this line because I just sang that other line. So thinking stuff like that in your head will become more or less automatic the more you repeat it, but noticing it when you're first prepping a song can be really helpful. And also tip number 7 is related to all this, because once you're starting to notice these patterns, whether they are in rhythm, rhyme, whether it's how the chords move, like even if it's something like my fingers need to go from this C to this A minor, and I can do that from my ring finger to my index finger, practicing just one change over and over again in a tricky part, or when we switch to the bridge, I start on a G7 chord and I'm coming from a C. Whatever you're noticing in the song, if you can visualize that in your head, if that works for you. Not everyone's a visual learner. For some people, it's going to be literally sort of thinking about the shapes that their fingers are making on the fretboard. And for other people, it's going to be thinking about what that page looked like when they first looked at it. Because again, some people think of it that way and some people don't. Or it could even be a more, I don't want to say synesthesia, but a more sort of imaginary visualization that you do. Like you're thinking about, okay, here the sound is going up a hill or down a hill. Maybe you've got a little walk down, and you're thinking about, in my head, that's me kind of going down the hill. You know, you can make up a story for yourself that's a visual story that works with the sounds that you're hearing, the shapes that you're making. That for some people will be the way that they can remember, this is what I've got to do when I go from the second verse into the bridge instead of the chorus. I kind of picture whatever in my head. And it could, again, be related to your fretboard. It could be related to the emotion of the song. You could think, there's a big build here, or there's an explosion out of the box. You know, make it as creative as works for you, or as simple as works for you. But when these things start to sort of take shape in your mind, lean into that. Because I think that learning how we learn, it's an individual process, but learning what works for you is really key to figuring out how to memorize, if that's one of your goals. So sometimes it's going to mean doing some looking at our hands, and sometimes it's not. It's really going to be what's working for you in this particular moment. If you're exaggerating things, especially if you're like leaning into rhyme or leaning into rhythm, be sure to also practice backing off once it starts to get into your system a little more and you start to be able to remember it. Don't make it so over the top that then you don't think it works for your final performance. So don't always practice it in a big over the top way, just like you wouldn't always practice it super slow or super fast. You would want to shift things around to be the most versatile player that you can be. When it starts to get more fluid, you can back off of some of these ideas. Sometimes people want to even do things like make sure they're consciously looking away from their fretboard. You can close your eyes. You can, even use a blindfold. I've seen people do that. Whatever is working for you to feel like, okay, I've got this in my body and in my brain. Sometimes people are even picturing lyrics in their head. That can be another way to do the visualization. They might see the words, or animation of the words, or colors. This verse is blue and the chorus is green. There really is no wrong answer if it's working for you. And let me know in the comments if you have any interesting ways that you find yourself visualizing songs as you're singing or playing them. Even if they're not memorized for you yet, let me know what that brings up for you. Tip number 8 is to make ear training a habit. So this is not necessarily a tip just for when you're working on a particular song, but in general, if memorization is one of your goals, you may want to think about ear training also being one of your goals. And what this can look like is you sort of turning on whatever playlist you're listening to, or your Spotify, and putting it on shuffle, or listening to your CDs in the CD changer if you're like me and you still have a CD player, or turning on the radio and listening to music and trying to find notes on the fretboard to see where are they singing, where are they playing, or chords. Sometimes you can listen to an album you really love and think, oh wow, they're doing a lot of songs with the A chord in this, and try to play along. You won't necessarily be able to do everything, but if you can hear something and kind of pick up, at least I know that's a C, that sounds like C goes along with that. That can be a really helpful way if you ever get stuck and you've forgotten something, to sort of have some of these different patterns that are just sort of universal, like those chord changes that happen in lots of different songs. If you know, if I'm on C, then maybe there's a G coming next, or maybe not, but you can start to hear chords that come together a lot. Like I hear D minor to G7 a lot. That happens a lot. You have F and B flat paired together a lot. or at least in the same songs, not necessarily right after each other. But once you start to hear these different things, or if you're learning songs and you're noticing, say jazz shapes that come together like this fancy A minor 7 and then the D7, once you start to see patterns like that, those are things that may come up for you later, so that if I get stuck on an A minor 7, I can't remember what chord comes next, maybe it's not a D7, but I can practice that and try it and see if it works. So doing those sorts of things, trying to figure out riffs and rhythms for yourself, changing keys and seeing, okay, well, if a lot of times we hear the C to the G to the A minor to the F, what would that be if I transposed that and did it in another key? You'll start to see more patterns emerging. You'll start to be able to sound things out. And another thing that I put on the handout for you to try is building your own movable chord shapes. So just trying to find other places to have, like, okay, if I've got the C chord here, where's another place I can find the C? Or I go E, F, G, A, B, C. So you can find different chords and kind of move things around for yourself. I have a whole video on movable chord shapes if that's helpful to you. This is all part, not necessarily of memorizing per se, but of ear training. And if you can find the sound you're looking for on your keyboard faster, then if you get stuck in a position where suddenly your brain blanked and you can't think of where you are, you can fake it better if you have the ear for roughly what should be coming next. And then let's see, let me just check my notes and make sure I said what I wanted to say about that. Yes, so tip number 9 and 10 are my last two tips. So for tip number 9, I've written look ahead and look up. This is also something to practice at any time. And even if memorization really isn't your goal, this is something you can work on. Even if performance is never your goal, this is something that's great to be able to do. Just, you never know when you might be playing in a jam group and you want to really feel like you're having fun and looking around at your friends. It's a great skill to practice even if you're playing alone at home, and it's especially good if you are going to ever play, or you might even slightly play an open mic, whether it's online or in person, or you might want to play in a jam group just so you can look around the room. So this means that you look ahead at the next few chord changes coming up, or maybe even just the next one chord change coming up. And you sort of in your head while you're playing and or singing, you notice where that chord is changing and what chord it is. And this takes some practice, but you can get it so that you can look down at the music, see what the next one is. Okay, on the word fear, I'm changing to an F. And then you look up and you look out. And you can practice this in your room with no one else there. I do that because sometimes I'm performing songs, and you can look out at an imaginary audience, and you can, when you get to that word fear, you can change, and then you might have to look right away again, but it can be a great way to practice this technique even when you're not memorizing a specific song. This is also great for people who want to video themselves, say for something like 100 Days of Ukulele or Instagram or YouTube, or you just want to be able to watch yourself back. And in fact, videoing yourself so that you can see how often you're able to look up if you are working on memorization for a performance can be a really great thing to do too. So there's lots of ways that you can use this skill. People in choirs use this skill a lot because we may have our music in front of us. If it's not specifically for a memorization, we may have our music in front of us, but we need to look up at the person who's conducting, who's leading, the choir director. We need to see the rhythm and what they're directing us to do in terms of volume and tempo and all those things. Orchestra, I played violin and piano as a kid, and in the orchestra you may have your music in front of you, but you need to be able to look up at the person leading the song. In a jam group, you may be able to, or you may want to look up at the person leading the song, even if you don't have to. So it's a great skill to practice looking down and then looking up, and then you can look down again and try to get your eyes up off the page as much as possible. I find that even if you're only ever doing open mics or performances where you don't have to have things memorized, looking up off the page is still a really important thing to do so that you can connect with your audience. All right, and then number 10, my last tip is come back to it even after you're done. So you may have memorized a song, you may feel like you know it perfectly, but that's not necessarily going to stick in your head, especially if you're going to go on to memorize other songs, or pieces of it may stick. But it really is still about repetition, and so if you can, come back to that song periodically and play as much as you can, again, without looking down at any memory aids, and see what you remember and what you might have forgotten. You can have a special set list of pocket songs that you want to know on your phone or in your practice notebook. I, for a while, had a special practice notebook just of the songs I wanted to be able to memorize so that I could flip through it and work on any number of them at a given time. You may want to do something called Memory Monday, which I've seen people on Instagram do, where they either pick a song out of a hat of one that they have memorized or they're working on memorizing, or they I've seen people use a randomizer on the internet to pick it as well, and try to play that song even if you haven't played it in months. See how much of it you remember. So keeping those skills fresh can be really important if you want to keep it memorized. And play through them for yourself, play through them for your friends and family. Take your ukulele to the park and try to play through a song, even if you have your phone right there or your practice notebook. See how much of it you can do from memory. And it should be a low pressure situation where you won't feel upset if you don't get it all right. But I think most of the time ukulele players are fairly forgiving about stuff like that. So it can be a really good way to share some music with some friends, sit down at the campfire, sit down in the dark in your living room and just play for your family, and see what you remember before you have to go to your music. And if you're doing it all digitally, you can have a practice folder on your computer or your phone or your tablet that is the songs that you're trying to memorize, so that you can remember what those songs are too, right? You can go back to that list and say, oh, I forgot that I had this one memorized for a while. Let me go back and see if I can play that one again. So I think that's plenty of tips for you to start out with. You may have others that you've heard from other people. Share your best ones in the comments. Let me know what's working for you. Let me know what else you'd like us to talk about in a video like this. I didn't do very much playing on my ukulele today, but I knew I wasn't going to. I just wanted to talk about these ideas for memorization and get this video out to you. Thanks to the person who suggested it. I think it was Natalie, but if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. And keep making those requests. Thank you again to all my patrons for making these videos possible, and everybody who watches them, whether you are or ever will be or ever have been a patron, no matter. I look forward to sharing stuff like this video series with you on YouTube for free and to the public. So again, happy playing, happy memorization. If you watch this whole video but you still hate the idea of memorizing, that's cool too. And I'll see you all again soon on the internet. Bye, folks.